Hello, good afternoon or good morning. Welcome to our super exciting webinar today, hosted by uHoo. My name is Matthias Gelber, and I have the pleasure of hosting it today. And we will be looking at ESG, we'll be looking at decarbonization and what's in it for you and the real estate sector. I'm really excited about this topic or these two topics, because there's so much rich experience in them that the marketplace has gained in the last few years in particular. And with Paul Wessels all the way from the Netherlands and Mary Chong with us from Singapore, we have two excellent speakers who will competently share experiences, thoughts, and cases on the subject matters. But let's first kick off with a little poll at the beginning to get ourselves warmed up, to get ourselves into the subject. The intro poll, I will pull it up here now. What are your most important reasons for considering ESG for your business? This is a multiple choice question. Is it because of investor ratings that you kind of feel you have to do it? Are you expecting improved employee health? Overall ROI? Do you think more employees will get engaged and more productive through the application of ESG principles? Improve your overall environmental performance, reduce your carbon footprint, or align generally with ethical values that ESG is good in helping with that? Please do your multiple choice answers. Will be very interesting to get a gauge of what the audience thinks are the most relevant issues for ESG, for your business, for your real estate, for your organization. I'll give it another short while, so we at least hit the 50% rate of you guys who are currently already on the call. Usually what happens is more people join as we go along. Okay, we are now hitting 56%. I think once we are 60%, I will finish the poll and share with you the interesting results. We need one more person, and then I will reveal to you. Yeah, there we go. That's it already. Now we have 70%. Great. Let me share the results here. You can see that the 76% of people actually believe it will help improve the environmental performance. And the second highest is it will help reducing the carbon footprint. It's interesting that the majority actually focuses here on the environmental issues and the environmental benefits. Actually, at the bottom, there is a question, not interested in ESG for my business. Nobody has ticked that box. That's quite encouraging. What comes next then is the ethical part, aligned with our ethical values, 41%. But and then the improved employee health is 29%. But the investor ratings, which is for a lot of listed companies, maybe the key reasons that they initially started, only kicks in at 18% here. Overall ROI 18%, and more employee engagement and productivity as well 18%. Thanks everyone for contributing, and those are interesting results. I will take my own little screenshot now. Always good to have those as future references. So without further ado, I will hand over to Paul, all the way from the Netherlands. He has a lot of experience with ESG in the real estate sector, and he will share with us some very valuable insights. Paul, over to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me. I'll share my screen and share some information with you guys. Okay. Well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm the co-founder of Blue Module, and with Blue Module, based in Amsterdam, we want to have impact for investors and developers and also big corporates in creating a better world with healthy and sustainable real estate. We do that by offering our clients a project and a process management system whereby you can really make this information, get insight into ESG information in your portfolio. And well, today I want to talk to you about, what we can call the second revolution in sustainability, and that revolves around health. We've been talking about health for decades, and we know for decades how big the impact is of the built environment on our well-being. But the last couple of years this has really accelerated, and I think the Corona crisis has had a big part in that, in creating that awareness. And what you see right now is that the importance of ESG for the value of a building is really increasing. And I'll give you some reasons for that. Firstly, if you look at the end user, the corporates, the people who live and work in the buildings, they want more healthy and sustainable real estate to work in. And also you see that the big corporates, they all have their ESG policy in place. That's very important. But another aspect, of course, is that you see the regulation concerning ESG really stepping up. And for instance, here in the Netherlands, you have, for instance, a new label for office buildings. And if you don't pass that label in 2 years' time, that stands for a certain value of energy performance. If you can't get that performance, you are not able to operate that building as an office anymore. So that means something. And also in the EU, in the European Union, you see the regulation stepping up. Okay, and all this means that the need for monitoring this kind of information, ESG information, on a continuing basis, that's really becoming important. So you can call that trend test, verify, certify. So it's ongoing, and you have to prove it every time that you have it right. But luckily, you don't have to find out yourself how you gather that kind of information. But in the last couple of years, you've seen really the growth of really good best practices worldwide. For instance, if you talk about sustainability, you have BREEAM, you have LEED. If you look at health, more specific, you have the WELL certification, of course, but also FitWell is very interesting. That's more a new certification. You have GRESB for institutional investors. So there's a lot of good best practice around there. So if you talk to investors and also to corporate, what's their biggest challenge? And what I find striking is that many of the big players, they have really already invested into sustainability, but they're saying, what's the next step? How can I be a leader in this field? And then health and well-being is very important. And also, if you look at projects regarding ESG, they are becoming more and more complex, and they were becoming more costly. So the costs of these projects is really a thing. And the third thing is that you see these projects becoming more and more complex in terms of the number of stakeholders and contractors you have to involve to get it right. And we're helping our clients with a 5-step plan in this, and I'll walk you through it. In the first step would be you have to delve into the business case and understand the business case of ESG, and also get as many people as you can involved in this business case within your organization. the second one is, what are your goals? I mean, do you lean towards sustainability or health or both? You have to determine that. And then 3, you have to determine which best practice can you best use in getting to that ambition. And I already said there are a lot of best practices you can use. And we've implemented those best practices also in the software we have developed. And 4th, focus on the execution, of course, very important. It's all about process management, project management, having people, having the parties involved in getting the project going. And the 5th thing is, communicate to all the stakeholders, firstly, the end users, but also your shareholders, the government, banks. That's becoming increasingly important. And I'm giving here a practical example of how that works within our approach. And this is about the Well Health and Safety Rating, which is focused on operational policy, maintenance protocols, and emergency plans. It has 22 strategies, and these are most important topics are keep spaces clean and sanitized, provide essential health benefits and services, communicate health and safety efforts, help prepare for an emergency, and access air and water quality. That's a lot. So we put all these steps you have to take in a project like this in our system. And for instance, here you see an example of ventilation. So certify that ventilation is performed correctly in the project, or upload a professional narrative. And this is the way to gather all that information and make it into meaningful information you can also communicate. Okay, I'm coming to my takeaway. Be a winner. Sustainability in health is really going to make the difference if you look at the value of a building or a portfolio. And we've talked about, the role of the tenant, the role of the investor, and also the regulation, which is really stepping up. And if you really are serious about it, I mean, a sustainable, healthy brand for customers and employees is very important, but you have to prove all the time that you really are making it work. I mean, we are beyond greenwashing or blue washing. You have to prove it. Another important aspect is these projects are becoming more and more complex. So saving cost through efficient business operations is also important. And lastly, why do we do it? To increase our impact on a better world, of course. Thank you very much.
All right, Paul, thanks a lot for your great input. I think there were a couple of things that I just quickly want to follow up on with. We had a couple of questions come in advance through the registrations. One of them was, for example, and I think it fits nicely into the subject matter now, IAQ, indoor air quality, and ESG. How do they coincide? How do they overlap? What would you say on that question?
Air quality, of course, is one of the important aspects of, if you look at ESG, if you look at the best practices for ESG, like well and also fit well, then air quality is very important. One of the things you have to look at if you want to score points on health and well-being.
Yeah, I would always say to people, I mean, the principle of ESG is materiality. What is priority? What is material? And if you're an office-based organization, employee health and wellness, and I think wellness is now more the used expression, is a very high importance material issue. So you should manage it. And to effectively manage it, you need to monitor your indoor air quality, and it aligns with all those standards that Paul mentioned. The standards are given to make it more systematic, to calibrate, to have it all there. Then Paul will give it to you on your dashboard.
Yeah, maybe to add something to that, Matthias. So we're working, for instance, with uHoo, one of the important players who is really measuring and also helping with the sensors in air quality, in really translating that information from the sensors to, sensible information. I mean, and you have to measure it towards a benchmark like well or fit well, and then it makes sense. And that's basically what you have to do to make ESG information out of it.
Yeah. Making it make sense, understanding it, and then setting continual improvement targets. Yes. And then you will get the ROI, the return on investment from your higher productivity. That's great. Yeah. I'm sure Mary has something to say about that later on. But one more question for you, Paul, before we hand over to Mary, as well, a question that came in advance, which was quite interesting. One of our participants says, green buildings. How can it be beneficial for ESG without hurting our wallet?
Very good question.
Don't hurt our wallet.
Well, my answer would be, I mean, there's no free lunch. I mean, somebody has to invest. I mean, we're all in it for a better future. I mean, so you have this whole question of split incentive between the tenant and the investor, and we have to find a way to find a solution for that. But I think the interesting thing is also, if you also include health, there the benefits are much more tangible. I mean, the benefits for the employees or the people who live in the buildings are direct now. So that makes it easier to talk also about the business case and then you have the green business case and the blue business case, but they are becoming connected.
Yeah. I always remember at a previous uHoo webinar, we had, I think it was Menarco Towers, Manila, and their case study was in the previous office, which was not green, not healthy, not designed for wellness. They had a nurse. So they assumed they will need a nurse as well in the new healthy building. But actually, once they moved into the new healthy building, they had hardly any headaches or employee complaints anymore. The employee sick leave statistics went down like crazy, and that was huge ROI. So, I mean, we don't want to cancel any jobs, right? But in effect, they hardly needed the nurse anymore, which was very busy in the old building because it was a building with, partially sick building syndrome. And then you have a lot of people off sick, and that costs you a lot of money, but you might not be measuring it. Great job, Paul. We'll go more into detail later on. We have plenty of time for Q&A. So all the way, or maybe not so far, because a lot of us are in Southeast Asia, just around the corner, Mary from Singapore. And we will hear some exciting things about decarbonization from an investor's perspective, but as well from an operational perspective. So over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Matthias, and thank you, Paul, for kicking us off. So just give me a second while I get my screen up. Can you see this now?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, hi everyone. Pleasure being here with you today. My name is Marie. I am a founding partner in Wavemaker Impact. So Wavemaker Impact is the first VC-backed climate tech venture builder in Southeast Asia. So that's a mouthful, right? But basically, there's 5 of us partners that came together to form Wavemaker Impact. And I would say if there's 2 beliefs that kind of hang all of us together. The first is that entrepreneurs are going to play a critical part in driving solutions to climate change. And the second element is that if we want to really have an impact, we're going to need high growth, scalable solutions that are commercially viable. So our goal is at Wavemaker Impact is to work with founders to co-found what we're calling 100 by 100 companies. So these are companies that have the ability to reach 100 million in revenue and abate 100 megatons of carbon at scale. A lot of our thesis is around the fact that you don't have to make a trade-off between commercial opportunity and impact, but actually where we are in terms of the need of the world for climate change the transition to the green economy, that this actually presents a very real venture opportunity. So, just a little bit about that. I firmly believe that climate is the new tech, right? So, before we used to have tech companies and the economy, and now every company is a tech company. In the same way, it'll be the same thing with climate. So just to give you a scale of the market, in 2019, 16 billion was invested in climate tech. And in the first half of 2021, 16 billion was invested. So climate tech is growing at a phenomenal rate. It's growing 5 times faster than VC investment. On the flip side, only 3% of that money is coming into Southeast Asia, where I'm based and where quite a few of us is based. And on top of that, 63%, the vast majority of investment in climate tech goes into green mobility, which is only about 12-13% of our emissions. So there's just a real mismatch between where the money is going and where solutions are needed. And that's why we decided to venture build at Wavemaker Impact, because we felt if we were just doing a pure play VC model for climate tech, the pool wouldn't be big enough because there aren't enough entrepreneurs and not enough startups looking in the right space. So our starting point was to actually create Southeast Asia's first carbon map. We didn't set out to do this. We just went looking for a carbon map and realized that there wasn't one available. Some interesting things come out, in Southeast Asia. Obviously land use and agriculture play a really big role, but energy emissions in Southeast Asia alone accounts for 22% of energy in the built environment, so including buildings, accounts for 22%. And when we were talking about this map earlier, Matthias quite correctly pointed out that construction and buildings actually cut across a lot of this. Cement, for example, has a lot of the emissions are in the industrial process. There's the whole supply chain issue around which requires transportation. And so, the statistic that we hear a lot is that building and construction on a cross-cutting basis accounts for 39% of global greenhouse gas emissions globally. So it's a really big sector in terms of opportunity and in terms of dollars and carbon. So I thought it would just be interesting to share a little bit about a venture that we built earlier in this year that was all about decarbonizing office buildings. And this was the big insight that we got. This is kind of the golden ratio that many commercial landlords and facilities managers for large MNCs told us. So it's for every $1 that is spent on electricity, $10 is spent on rent, and $100 is spent on people costs. So exactly kind of what Paul was talking about, right? When we're talking about investing in buildings and in the built environment, a lot of times we see a lot of startups focusing very heavily on the energy use, which from a GHG perspective, of course, is really large. But from a facilities manager or from a landlord's perspective, is actually a very small amount of cost. What people actually care about in this context is making sure that people are happy and healthy in their work environment, that they're coming into the office, that they're using the office in the way that they're intended, and they're productive. And that, and I think that's really where the ESG argument comes in. So, I mean, I'll give you another little stat around this. So in Singapore, in the commercial CBD, the cost of the office space per person is $15,000 a year. So if you think now with COVID, people are coming to the office maybe once a week, that means that, you know, 12K per employee is left on the table in unnecessary costs. And, you know, you have a 100-person office, that's 1.2 million. That's basically, you know, lost on an annual basis. So, you know, what I like to say is that what's the key to decarbonizing office buildings? It's all about how people are using the space, how they're happy and healthy in the space. You know, I think that's going to be the key to creating value in this space. So this is the company that we ended up building with a fantastic founder, Virginia. So the whole idea here is to maximize the employee experience, and in doing so, use that as a lever for reducing the carbon footprint, both in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of space. So Place helps facilities managers and MNCs increase the utilization of their office while maximizing workplace experience. It helps them not only right size and optimize workspace based on employee experience, but also taking into account occupancy monitoring, analytics, energy efficiency, and other sustainability metrics. So exactly, you know, bringing environmental data into the workplace decision-making process. And then finally, it helps companies offset the rest of their emissions. So, you know, what's one of the fastest ways to reduce your Scope 1 emissions? Cut your office space by 50%. So that's kind of the that's the sort of gist, and I think that's the thought that I'd like to leave you with in terms of the opportunity for ESG in the workplace. A lot of times we think about that in terms of things like energy efficiency, which can be a dry metric. But I think, you know, the way that we realize the opportunity for decarbonization in the built environment is really by focusing on the people and how people feel about the spaces that they work and live in and how they use those spaces. And if we efficiently use those spaces, the knock-on effect for that will be decarbonization and better ESG performance. So that is it.
Wow. Mary, you might have shocked some people now with your cut your office space by 50%, especially those who are on the call and owning real estate. But there we go. That's the current challenges and trends. One thing that struck me with your presentation was, you know, that we need rethinking, because my thinking always is when it comes to decarbonization of office space, oh, energy efficiency. But here we have a startup that has used a different approach and maybe gotten better results by looking at energy efficiency, just one piece of the jigsaw. I'll just kick off our discussion here with two questions that came in as well through the registrations in advance of our event. One question was the carbon footprint of a leased office. Should that be attributed to a landlord or a tenant when you look at calculations for decarbonization?
So it's, you know, one of the interesting findings that we came up with when we were ideating what eventually became the startup Place is that in an office building, 50% of the energy usage goes to tenants and 50% of it goes to the building itself. So I do agree that as tenants, there's a limit to what you're able to control in terms of your direct environment, and that's also complicated by, you know, not all buildings, especially in this region, have the ability to, you know, for example, control HVAC by individual office, and in some case control some central lighting. So I do think that you know, the most effective, or I would say the best practice in the sector is for large tenants and landlords to work very closely together. So I think that's one very clear kind of trend that we're seeing. And then I think the other is just to operate with what's within your control. And there are some things that are very clearly in control of the tenant that should be directly attributed to the tenant's carbon footprint.
Yeah, actually, in the case of the office that I sometimes go to in Metro Manila, we don't have control over the HVAC. It's completely out of our control. It's difficult to sometimes get data from the landlord because they kind of treat it a little bit like it's their data. And we calculated the carbon footprint of the cooling for the space and attributed it to our own scope 2 energy consumption carbon footprint. So we took it as our carbon footprint, but it's only a calculated measure because we don't know the actual power consumption, because we have no access to that. We only have access to the power data of the lights, the equipment, and the additional split air cons for some of the areas that are directly measured for us. So this is a difficult one, but my recommendation would be take charge of it even as a tenant and try and allocate it to your carbon footprint, because that is the most holistic way of doing it. And in the future, you will even have to have scope 3 included, which is all of your supplies and procurement and stuff like that, your supply chain. And for example, Microsoft already made the commitment by 2030, including scope 3 will be climate neutral. So, but this is an opportunity for suppliers. And this goes back to what we discussed earlier with Paul. If you already can offer a client a climate neutral office space, you are already scoring brownie points with big clients like Microsoft who have those targets. What's your experience in that case, Mary? Is it already a commercial competitive opportunity if you have a fairly decarbonized office that you can use it to sell your office space?
Yeah, of course, 100%, right? I think that's a clear winner, and that's and that's why landlords, the number one pain point that we heard from landlords during this process was turnover. They're worried about retaining their customers and keeping their customers in the building, and then there's a lot of cost to finding new tenants to come in. So if one of the ways where you're able to retain customers and increase stickiness is by offering them kind of net zero from day one, then I think that's a clear advantage. And to your point, Matthias, about the difficulty of tracking, that's exactly why Place exists, right? Because the lack of data is a very real challenge. And a lot of the facilities managers that we spoke to just simply said that they didn't have the data in order to make meaningful decisions, around how to change behavior. So you have no idea what to do if you can't even measure it, right? So I think that's a lot of what Place set out to do. And I realize you asked me to share a few stats, and I forgot to do it during my main presentation, but to give you an idea of order of magnitude, right? For a 1,000-person office, so it is a much larger office, right? For MNCs, something like Place, right, which really goes around energy savings and optimizations in Singapore would only save about 30K in energy costs. So the energy is not the big cost driver or where the savings come from, but in that same amount of time, we estimate that we'd be able to do something like 1.2 million in cost avoidance, so through reconfiguring space to increase utilization, and 3.6 million in cost reduction. And that's just in terms of floor space, right? Making better use of the space that you have. So, I think when we talk about the opportunity for ESG, like just like I said, a lot of times people go in exactly at energy, but if energy is not the use case that's going to make people think, then maybe there are other use cases which will deliver the same outputs, but speak more directly to the pain points of the customers.
Yeah. And those were very interesting figures. I mean, 30K is, I don't want to say peanuts, but it doesn't get a CFO excited. But once we are talking about millions, and I guess you're talking about Singapore dollars here,
yes.
We are hitting levels that have a material impact on financial performance. And you didn't even mention the figure that you might be expecting in terms of employee productivity increases if, let's say, the mental wellness improves through space optimization, the employee productivity improves through optimized indoor air quality, through the monitoring, more fresh air. The risk of COVID is reduced with a better fresh air supply, and maybe even like what uHoo does, having a COVID metric where you get a gauge of is it high or low risk. I mean, did you do an attempt to calculate the productivity related gains there?
So, I mean, I completely agree. I think that's where the big upside is going to be. And your example of in the Monarco building is a really good one. But I think what we felt was, with an early stage startup, and Place is very early stage, we wanted to be able to prove the POC with direct impact. And I guess, it can sometimes be tough to measure some of these health kind of benefits and employee satisfaction benefits and directly attribute it to the place, to space. But I think that I think those benefits are substantial.
Yeah. Great, excellent. Everybody on the call, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section. We have from Daniel the comment that he's really loving Mary's presentation and rethinking everything now. That's great. You already kind of triggered off some serious rethinking, and I'm sure some serious action as well. I have a question here that came in previously that I want to share with both of you. Somebody was asking what could be the business model for Southeast Asia for those nearly net zero carbon buildings that are being pushed in the EU. I mean, in the EU, you have, Paul mentioned as well, you have to comply with standards in Holland that are often related to energy consumption per square meter of office space, right? Energy efficiency indexes. If that is close to zero, the net zero buildings, is that feasible in Southeast Asia? What's the business model for that? Maybe Paul, you can start off with that, and then Mary can give her point on that as well.
Well, if you talk about, we talked about energy consumption, and I think that regulating the market is also very important. So the government really has to step up, and the business case for health and wellness is becoming more and more important. But I think it's not enough to really rely on that. So there has to be some intervention of governments with a regulation, and especially if you talk about energy performance of buildings, because the business case is kind of feeble. It's how do you share the benefits of decarbonization of a building? It's still difficult. So you have to say, as a government, I mean, this is the level we want to accept in buildings.
I mean, classically, the justification was the ROI from the energy savings, but that one got killed off by Mary, at least partially earlier on. Even though I think it still has a substance in countries where the cost of energy is quite high. And the interesting play that in the office we did in Metro Manila, we shifted to renewables. You can do that in the Philippines if you have a certain consumption, and we actually saved money. The renewable energy with a massively reduced carbon footprint is cheaper in the Philippines than the general energy because you get a tax incentive, a tax break for renewables. So that's amazing, actually, and I was really impressed with that. And now our carbon footprint, scope 1 and scope 2, and scope 2, that's the electricity, that's the big one. Scope 1, by the way, for all the listeners, is your direct carbon footprint. That would be like your vehicles, your diesel that you're burning. That would be scope 1. Scope 2 is the electricity. You don't generate the electricity, the power plant somewhere far away from you generates the electricity. So you don't directly generate the carbon footprint, but you're responsible for it because you're consuming and buying the electricity. That's scope 2. Scope 3 is the big, difficult ones. And interestingly enough, Mary mentioned about investment in climate tech. I have come across 2 or 3 startups recently that tackle exactly that. The scope 3 data collection and metrics for decarbonization of your supply chain. That's a huge business opportunity because it is so complex, but that's where we are going. And Larry Fink, a lot of you guys will have heard of him, the big boss of BlackRock. You can Google that. One of his most recent statements was the highest level of, what do we call them? Unicorns, right, Mary? Those super successful VC-backed startups that go into the billion-dollar levels. The biggest, he expects 1,000 unicorns over the next, I don't know how many years, to be emerging in the climate tech space. So for everyone out there, if you've just lost your job or you want to do something new, climate tech might be just the right thing for you to do. And we have the next question from David, my good friend David, another expat here in the Philippines, who lives around the corner, but I haven't seen him for a long time. Is there any data or statistics on the carbon footprint of work from home versus working in the office? That's an interesting question. Are you cutting down your carbon footprint when you work from home? Or is your home carbon footprint even higher than your percentage in the office when you're in there? Mary, what's the take on that?
Well, so first of all, Matthias, as you rightly said, scope 1 emissions has to do with commuting. So I think lack of commuting is immediately cutting down scope 1 emissions for most companies, and probably your personal emissions as well. This may be a little bit of an unpopular opinion, but you know, I think a lot of responsibility for carbon emissions has been pushed to individual households and individuals, and which is I think a little bit misleading. So I did a little calculation myself, back of the envelope, and I realized that every single person in Singapore every single household in Singapore has to reduce their carbon emissions by half in order to save 1 megaton of carbon. And I mean, I think that's impossible, right? And people in Singapore consume 40 times more electricity than people in the Philippines, for example. So I think that's one. I don't think we need to worry too much about our personal consumption, you know, within reason. And then secondly, I think the other finding is that the HVAC in your office is still probably on. I mean, you can sit at home and turn your aircon on as well, but you know, your office building is probably running anyway. So I think if anything, it's probably adding rather than subtracting from the overall, I guess, net contribution from work activity.
Yeah, I think you might be right there, because our electricity bill here at home went up once I started setting up my home office. One additional inverter aircon, but still it consumes electricity, and less commuting. And David knows I used to hang out mainly in the coffee shops, so my carbon footprint was kind of diverted to the coffee shops, but now it's home-based. So I think it can actually increase our collective carbon footprints. And that was some of the statistics in some countries a while after the pandemic, where actually the total power consumption went up. Anything to add to that, Paul, from a Dutch perspective? Any data from Holland?
I didn't see any data, but I agree with Marie that it's all about the existing stock, and these buildings are still there and they're still being heated, or you have air conditioning. And so that's where the challenge is. So that would be my reaction.
Great, great. We have one question that came in from Seng Yo, and as well one that is linked to that that came in from earlier when people registered, but we'll tackle this one first. I'll give that to you first, Paul. Is there an overlap between the ESG agenda and sustainable development goals? If so, how do you reconcile the overlap and avoid duplication of efforts?
Well, that's an interesting question. So the sustainable development goals is really I would say a best practice, and also if you look at, but ESG is more is a very broad term, and this question is really hard. If you look at the main best practices in the world, they have a lot of overlap. So one of the things we do as Blue Module is trying to harmonize all these data. So for instance, if you look at air quality, or you look at emissions, or you look at lighting in a building, there are different benchmarks, but you need to gather the same information for a building or a portfolio. So as a building owner, I think it's very important to harmonize these data, because you never know which best practice you want to adhere to or want to use in your communication. And otherwise you have to do you have to do a lot of work for different projects. So harmonizing the information is very important.
All right, that's good. I think as well that generally speaking, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are very much formulating the impact we would like to deliver through businesses to the world. And the ESG frameworks is what the investors look at from a risk and opportunity perspective. So there is definitely a significant overlap, as Paul mentioned. And I think the way you can calibrate them is look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals as your impact focus areas, and use ESG as your operational opportunity and risk management framework to drive those positive impacts. And then you can avoid the overlap, but you have a synergistic collaboration. There was another question, Paul, that links in with that. How can the governance aspect in ESG be effectively implemented?
Well, that's, I think, and there the whole aspect of communication is very important. So, and I think that's something which is quite new for the real estate market, which is a very inward-looking market. They are not used to communicate the performances of their buildings. I mean, I've been involved with a company also which was researching rents and yields in the Netherlands, and there was in transparency. But now the whole ESG trend really needs this move towards transparency. So if you talk about governance, I think that's really a big issue, and I think we've got a lot of work to do in that sense, because it's not something real estate players are used to.
Yeah, I guess particularly there's a big difference between private players who keep the cards to their own chest and the listed ones for whom ESG is more or less mandatory already, and they have to really open their books much more, right?
Yeah, but the interesting thing is, and I can tell you from my experience here in the Netherlands and Europe, that the bigger private investors are now also embracing ESG. But that also means they have to really communicate about ESG. So that's a new thing. Yeah. You're seeing this trend.
Good. Any angles from your perspective on that ESG discussion, Mary?
No, actually, I mean, I think Paul's pretty much got it covered. I think governance is one of the hardest ones, and you know, for example, Tesla is often put up as an example of the challenges of reporting on ESG, right? So yes, it's engaged in making electric vehicles, which are in theory very good for the environment. I know some thought goes into their own processes as well, but can we say that Elon Musk tweets are good governance? Hard to say. Hard to say.
Yeah, for listed companies, governance is as well, the classical thing of protecting the rights of shareholders, having a whistleblower policy, and particularly as well in the construction industry, reducing the risk of corruption in the sector. I think that's where the communication and the openness will be challenged. But interestingly, coming back to a previous question, David actually clarified, Mary, that his comparison was not assuming people are still in the office. He wanted to compare a workforce that is office-based and maybe partially works from home compared to a workforce that is completely working from home. So where you have, decentralized people that never even want to step into an office. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a good question. And I think the short answer is we don't know, right? There's a lot of challenges that kind of COVID has kicked up. For example, who's responsible for health and safety in the workspace when people are working at home, right? Which is, do employers still have a duty of care to their employees when they're working from home and so on? So I think those are probably a lot of questions that don't have fully fleshed out answers yet. And I agree that, as more companies transition to a fully remote model, then the question of how do you measure the carbon footprint of that kind of business arrangement will become an interesting question.
Yeah, and we could push that discussion even further. Social issues, environmental climate justice issues. If you have decentralized people in the Philippines where you have very high cost of electricity, working outsourced for international clients on a fairly modest salary, they will most likely have a very modest carbon footprint because of the lack of affordability of aircon and other devices. And what struck me when I bought the inverter aircon here in the Philippines, I asked the salespeople, why you have so few inverter aircons here on the shop floor, even though the electricity is so expensive? Yeah, people can't afford to buy the more expensive inverter aircon, even though you recover the money after 5 or 6 months, because people have a limited budget for the next month, and then they only buy the cheap one, but over time it costs them a lot more. So that is even, a bigger question of climate justice, and the Western world has the majority of the impacts. But we'll leave that for another time. Let me just check. I think we've got more questions. No, actually, those. Yeah.
Yes, maybe can I make a point about people working from home? If you look at the scientific standpoint on that, I mean, if you look at health and wellness of people, the consensus is it's not a good thing that people work 100% from home. So they need to have their workplace, their office, meeting other people. So in terms of wellness and health, that's a very important thing. So the office won't disappear. I think there's a great future for the office actually, but for a healthy office and a sustainable office.
Yeah. Tell me more about that. I'm already surprised my 2-year-old son hasn't been banging on my door already during our webinar. but then you have the good balance of life of being with your family all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we have to, again, we need something like place for the mental wellness where we
Yes.
identify space and scenarios with your family,
Right.
age of children, all sorts of different variables that give us the insight. So I'm not sure whether that can deliver 100 metric tons for you, Mary, in your 100-100, but let's see. Maybe it can deliver loads and loads of healthy and happy people.
Yeah.
All right, great. So maybe a 30-second advice for those participants that are just starting on the ESG journey. Paul, from you, keep it very short and sharp.
Yeah.
And then the decarbonization journey, Mary, just your top tips for those that want to get started. And then we have a short video and an exit poll. And then we are done at the end of a great webinar.
Yeah. Okay. My great tip would be, make good use of what you already have got in your building or in your portfolio, and start from there. Choose a good best practice you can use and go from there.
Great, thanks. And Mary?
I think that mine's exactly the same. Yeah. I think the most important thing is action, right? So whatever small action you take, that's the best starting point.
All right, excellent. Action for ESG and decarbonization. We will have a video action now. Over to you, Cheska, to show us the video.
Tenants are worried about the air they breathe in their workplace due to COVID-19. Science has shown that poor indoor air increases the risk of coronavirus surviving and spreading through the air. Your tenant's safety may be at risk if they are exposed to poor air quality, resulting in worsened allergies and asthma, and may lead to long-term illnesses. Tenants who don't feel safe and comfortable are not likely to stay. There's never been an easy way to deal with problems in the air, until now. uHoo Aura continuously monitors all the important things in the air, so you know exactly what to do to improve it. View real-time and historical data of all your locations and manage them from one dashboard. Get alerts if any of your buildings exceed safety limits, so you can immediately take action. You'll get tips on what you can do to reduce the risk and ensure the safety of your tenants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. uHoo. Take control. Ensure safety. Reduce churn.
Yeah, I guess you've seen there the link to ESG, the employee or tenants, even if you are the landlord, perspective of helping them with better health, better wellness, and enhanced productivity. Now we've come to our exit polls. Today we have two. The first one is the speaker follow-up. Let us know which speakers you want to follow up with. I have to apologize. I didn't really bring Albert into the discussion today. I see him just there smiling from the background. And Albert is the guru on health and uHoo and indoor air quality. So if you want to know any more details, you can follow up with him. But our two stars of today are really Mary and Paul. So click those guys. And then they will get a notification to directly follow up with you. This is a way of how you can get more info. I think they will be happy to share their presentation slides as well and go into more details if needed. So there we go. We have our top performer is Mary. So no surprise here. She has the highest requests. There we go. That will be follow up. And we have one more poll today, which is all about how much you would love to recommend uHoo webinars to your friends and colleagues. I guess this is a little message from our amazing sponsors, uHoo, we would love to have you spread the word and the message about the hopefully very value-adding and interesting webinars that we are running. So please let us know, and then we can get a good idea of what we can improve potentially in the future, and how we can further promote. So thanks a lot for those who answered. And I think at the end as well, you will get a link to another uHoo survey when the screen closes. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Albert, as well. Sorry, I didn't bring you into the game, but we were so busy answering all those questions that came in. And looking forward to see you guys all in the new year. For those of you who celebrated, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and all the best with your ESG and decarbonization and employee productivity benefits. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.